Hi everyone, thanks a lot for coming here. And I think the topic today will be very exciting. We're going to talk about synthetic data in the real world. How to apply it, how to integrate it, how to vouch for it internally. And I think the really cool thing here is we're going to have input from really the three heads of people that need to be in the discussions. The tech side on my own, the agency side with Andy, and the client side with Antoinette. About me, I'm the CEO and founder of Fairgen. We basically build products for synthetic data in the real world, and we work typically with agencies. And we've basically proven over the years that it is possible to integrate synthetic data with trust and solve real-world problems like how to reach audiences and small groups. And I'll let the rest of the team introduce.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Davidson. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Bright Mountain, which is a marketing services company. I'm also the CEO of our research division, Big Village. Our focus on the market is creating connectivity between research and the rest of the marketing workflow, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about how the three of us have worked together to bring that to life for T-Mobile.
Yes, and I'm Antoinette Sandy from T-Mobile. I lead a data science and advanced analytics team inside our research and insights arm of marketing.
Amazing. So we'll get started. So I'll just start with a few questions, and hopefully the answers also will change along the talk. So the first question that we always get is, what is the future of data collection, right? It's something that has really changed over the last 100 years. We've started with, in person, right? About 100 years ago, people sitting down and just basically asking questions in person, noting the answers, and then collecting them. Things have evolved in the last century, going into in-phone calls, like phone interviews. And we realized that we can do a larger scale. And so we can ask more people questions, and basically that can get to higher quality insights. And the third revolution that happens at the beginning of this century is basically internet being used to collect responses, feedbacks, and everything. And just massive scale happens. And along the time, the way basically people vouched for these upgrades in the way we collect the data led to another level of scale, quality, and possibilities. And we're now in sort of what we think of as the fourth revolution of data collection, where AI can come in and help us do our job better, faster, and cheaper. The second question that we always get is, can synthetic replace fieldwork? We strongly think against that. What we think is synthetic is a way to do more. We think about hybrids, right? Human plus AI. We cannot basically replace completely fieldwork because opinions change all the time, right? We think one thing this month and we think completely differently the next month. One morning we wake up, we're super energetic. The next morning we wake up, we're super tired, right? And it impacts the way we think about the world and the way we think about things. And so we need to have the human in the loop. Otherwise, we'll never be basically online with what people actually think. And the third thing is, the name synthetic data is actually a problem, right? Because there's so many types of synthetic data on the market right now, and they are not created equal. Think about the level of risks of, for example, 100% synthetic versus synthetic wrappers that wrap around your sample, right? They don't bring the same amount of value. They don't also bring the same amount of risk, so we need to be really careful about that. And it's a really good transition with this slide that we always use to sort of position where Fairgen is at. So Fairgen is really a synthetic data company, but our focus is on the use case of boosting, where you already have a sample and you're trying to see how can I do more, right? There is a pain point that is common to the entire industry, right? And Antoinette can tell you a lot about that, which is you always want to dig deeper, right? When you try to win an election, you don't care about what the general American thinks. You care about, in that specific state, that specific population, how can I turn them to my cause? It's the same thing with brands, right? You want to understand how can I lift my brand within this niche target of the population. So that's what boosting is all about. And the fact that we already have samples, right, means that we start from somewhere. And it means that we're not going to have heavy hallucinations and weird things that can happen when you use LLMs, for example. So we don't use LLMs, this is statistical models. the 100% synthetic field is typically like things like ChatGPT wrappers, right, that try to emulate what people with specific ways of thinking about the world would respond to questionnaires. So it's nice for ideation, right, or interacting with basically personas that think about the world in the way you want them to think, but it's very risky because, again, opinions change, and these models are not always up to date. So it's directional, but it's never an absolute way to get answers. Now, I just want to explain a bit the theory of why basically what Andy and Antoinette are going to talk about is even possible. So what you see here at the top is a cloud of answers from a population. Think of it, for example, as 1,000 Americans answering a survey, a segmentation, a UNA, any type of study. And you have this niche, these little triangles at the bottom, right? It's a small niche, very hard to understand, but it may be a very strategic niche for your business. Think, for example, your customers, right? You're looking for what your customers think about your brands. And if this brand is not massive, right, you're going to have very small amount of answers to this study. But this is a group that matters for you. So how can you do better, right? What we're claiming is you can train a model on that sample, on these 1,000 people, and you're going to be able to do better than this small sample by learning signal from similar segments, right? I always take this example of a UNA, usage and attitude study, about meat consumption, and it's basically done by, for example, a meat manufacturer. And let's say your segment of interest is vegans because you think that the vegan market is untouched by the meat manufacturers because vegans don't eat meat. And you have only 25 vegans. But think about it, vegetarians and pescatarians have very similar usage and attitudes, right, to vegans with respect to meat. They all don't eat meat. So there's a lot of signal you can borrow from these groups. And if you can borrow that, you're going to be able to generate more rows in your data that are more informed than this small sample of 24 people. Operationally, we generate a 3x boost. The main requirements are that this cloud of points represents 300 people, and that the segment represents less than 15% of the population, which allows to have enough data on the side to capture signal and strengthen your understanding of this small niche. We can never just have a niche segment of, let's say, 100 people and turn it into a 500 sample. That doesn't work. You need to have a sample around that strengthens the understanding of that small segment. So the way we like to work as a tech company is work with agencies and clients, partners to bring the value down the road. So basically, we provide the model, right? It's a platform, it's a product. You can basically upload your sample and get more data for the samples of interest, right? So we partner with agencies, like Big Village, part of Bright Mountain, that basically use our products to boost their samples within all of their projects. We're not an insights company. We're really just a technology, a sample and technology provider. And basically on the client side, they basically benefit from having more granularity and insights. And I'll basically let them talk about that and explain, from their perspective, how all of this looks.
Thank you, Samuel. So from a market research agency perspective, we're very focused on, first of all, generating really powerful consumer insights for our clients, which in most cases are agencies and brands, but also in making sure that once the research is done, that those insights can be effectively translated into marketing strategy, starting with planning and then ultimately with creative development and then ultimately with deployment across omni-channel media platforms. We use data and technology to fulfill on that promise for our clients, and as we started to sort of get up to speed on the technology that Samuel has built, it quickly became evident that having that tool in our portfolio of data and technology solutions was going to make a considerable difference in our ability to fulfill on that commitment in a number of ways. First and foremost, and I cannot remember the order, so I'm going to have to look, was specificity, and Samuel mentioned that. We all work in market research and are all well aware that some segments are much smaller in population or in incidents than others. And oftentimes there is an interest in looking at geographic specificity, maybe looking at demographic specificity, ultimately unpacking audiences to better understand the nuances in those audiences. And so, it should be pretty obvious that this technology can help us address that specificity issue pretty effectively. The second is timing. The turnaround time for deploying this technology is remarkable. I mean, it took, in this case, I think it took 2 or 3 days, for us to get the work done once the project, once fielding was complete. And so it's very agile, and we can get it done quickly. I think the third thing, and these are all related, is cost. It's much more affordable in terms of achieving that specificity in the speed that we need it than it would otherwise be to go out and interview the number of people you would need to get to that specificity. And then the last thing, and this sort of dovetails or is an important part of our value proposition I was talking about earlier is model accuracy, right? We almost always develop models off of our survey data for purposes of creating connectivity with the workflows I was talking about earlier. Having this additional strength in the sample only improves the accuracy of those models, and that ultimately leads to campaigns that perform better and ultimately better ROI for our clients. So if you click forward, please. One of the first questions that I asked, and Samuel will remember, this is before we introduced the idea to Antoinette, was, well, if I have 50 people and I know what the patterns are in that data, why do I need to multiply them by 5 to see the same patterns? I can just live with the 50. And it pretty quickly the answer was, well, actually, you may not see the same pattern. You may see new patterns. And to me, that's the beauty of this technology. It has the potential to surface new patterns in data that would otherwise not be apparent on the smaller sample size. And to me, that's meaningful. If all we're going to do is multiply by 5 and see the same patterns we saw in the smaller data set, then I don't think it's terribly interesting. But if we're surfacing new patterns and new insights by deploying this technology, that's meaningful. And that ultimately is why we embrace this and have been encouraging our clients to leverage it. And then I will finish with just a little bit of insight into how we're using it here at Big Village. So we have some proprietary solutions. We have an audience planning platform. That is one of the first places that we have deployed this technology. It's helped us turn 100,000 deterministic observations into 400,000 deterministic observations. And so if you're a media planner and you're working with a regional brand who only has a footprint in 4 states, I can now give you media data on that brand. And so that's just an example of how for a very cost-effective, it's a very cost-effective solution to getting to specificity. And we are increasingly using it across all of our solutions. Antoinette's going to talk about how she's embraced it at T-Mobile, but it's pretty much being used across all of the use cases that that we support our clients with. So with that, I will hand it to Antoinette, who's going to talk a little bit about how she's used it at T-Mobile.
Oh, this is not my slide. No, nor is this. Oh wait, no, go back. Sorry. They've changed my slides. Yes, so again, my data science team sits inside our insights and research arm, and we're often tasked with solving the unsolvable questions, being innovative, not just for innovation's sake, but to really answer something that has never been answerable. And I'm sure you all have experienced this at some point where someone's asked you a question and it's like, it's a sample size of 25. I don't feel comfortable making conclusions, especially at a local market level. Let's say we open a store in a market for the very first time. Well, we expect there to be sales lift, obviously, but we also expect a ton of change in the people that live there and their brand perception, how they perceive us, what they think about us, what they think about the competitors. If we can't convince someone like we're the right option, then it doesn't matter, and we need to measure that. So I've been looking for, I think, 12 years for a solution to really help us answer how do you measure a market of 20,000 people with a survey without just going door to door and spending $500,000 to do it? And I really love working with Big Village because as an agency partner, there's so much more of a strategic partner. Andy and I have talked, and he's pushed back, and he's told me, you're thinking about this wrong, and I've kind of learned a lot, and I love that type of relationship. And so in one of those conversations, Andy's like, I think synthetic sample is the solution. And he really sold me on it, one, because it was fast and affordable, but also because it could answer the unanswerable. It was like, yes, this is what I've been looking for a decade. Thank you so much. And then he told me the price, and I was like, yes, let's do it. So you can go to the next slide. I was sold, but how do I sell my stakeholders? How do I sell people who spend real money on real marketing that this isn't fake? The word synthetic sounds fake, it's made up. How do I convince people who are gonna drop millions that they're doing so in a way that's going to result in something measurable and real? And so one of the first things that me and my team did is we just changed the vernacular. It's no longer synthetic, it's modeled, it's augmented. People love a model. They're like, oh, you can build me a model? You're a data science team, you're building me a model? And I'm like, yes, it's a model. And so that almost immediately really changed people's openness to this concept. The other thing that really helped is it's testable. Just like any statistical model, you get criteria at the end that tell you the strength of your model, how strong it is at predicting, and with this, we have the same thing. So I can go to our stakeholders who are making these decisions and say, here's how strong this augmented data is and how much you can believe it to be real. And that little change really opened up the appetite for utilizing this solution. So our product or products, you could probably guess where we're utilizing this. We have a local marketing budget. We have local marketing efforts. We really love doing tangible, get grassroots type relationships with our customers. We have a whole area of the business that's just about getting super local. What matters to this community? How can we lift them up while lifting the brand in general? And so we've started utilizing this technology, this algorithm, as I call it, to help us measure the impact of those somewhat intangible efforts in a metric that isn't a conversion, that isn't a sales. And so on my last slide here, I just wanted to kind of visually show you, this is from a nationally paneled brand tracker survey, balanced to the US population. And prior, we would only get enough sample to get a read on maybe the 21 biggest markets. It's great, that's obviously like our 21 biggest markets, 21 biggest sales markets, but what we really wanted to get at was the smaller markets, those hometown markets. And so through the use of synthetic sample, we've actually been able to unlock insights to almost 70% of the US population, which has been great. And it's not everybody, but it's really helped us understand who these newer customers are and what they think of us and measure progress that we're trying to make from a marketing perspective. And I think that's pretty cool.
Perfect timing. Yeah. Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so yeah, feel free. So on the technological side, so Fairgen itself doesn't collect any data. So the data is collected typically by the agency partners that typically works with their own or another panel. And so what goes into the model is a sample that has been collected. So the requirement is to have at least 300 in the total base size. And so on our side, we receive the raw data, so individual level data. So you can have columns being the variables, so all the questions, and the rows being the individuals. And that's what gets into the model. And the model is trained from scratch on that sample and generates a new file in the same format as the original file with just rows for the segment you wanted to augment. So, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific example, but you know, the media data that I was talking about earlier, you know, a lot of what we're looking at are media habits and media patterns, and so, you know, take you know, show level data or day part level data. You know, the patterns we see in the smaller sample sizes generally hold, but in many instances we see you know, new patterns in behavior that that make a lot of sense. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to add more to that.
You're not comparing the local 45, the local 45 people to the boosted. You know, you made them 150.
We are well. We're in terms of validation, we're doing that, but we're also doing holdouts, right? So we're boosting and then comparing the boost to a holdout, and there is consistency, right? It's not like, you know, take the media data for example. If an audience, if the show they watch most often is, you know, Handmaid's Tale, for example, it's the first one that comes to mind. It's a good show. You know, all of a sudden you're not going to see another show be the most popular show, but what you might see is the level of engagement with that show, or the profile of those people who watch that show, the distribution changes slightly. Okay. Yeah.
Sam, I think I understood what you were describing with your boost is that you're taking the predictive power of the adjacent population and borrowing that predictive power to enhance the predictive power of the boost sample. So where does synthetic data come into play?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And basically, if you think about it, it's a predictive way to generate more data. So if you think about the output of this whole thing, right, and the input itself. So the input is the raw data, and the output is more data, more rows, right? So you can think of it as imputation of whole rows. So when we say imputation, typically we're filling the blanks for a few columns where there is missing data. Here we're generating entire new rows for a segment based on these other segments themselves. So synthetic data is a very general term. It just means you're generating more data out of some data, or sometimes no data, right? So it's just about a term. I like to think of this as, you know, predictive model-based synthetic data. That's just a family. Yeah, always. So you can, statistics really refrain you from being able to train a model on top of synthetic data. Like, you're not going to have more gains. I had these questions in the past that people were asking, like, okay, so can I just put it back into the machine and now I have 3x times 3x is 9x? Like, can I do that? And no, that's there is the number one assumption of, and actually the only real important assumption in the data coming into the system is that it's what we call IID. It's identically and independently sampled from the population, and it assumes realness of that population. So with that, like, all of laws of statistics basically follow.
The unlock for me was, you know, methodologically, you know, you're leveraging the interrelationships between the sample you're boosting and the rest of the sample, and that's what's ultimately surfacing those potentially new trends.
Yes, of the boost, yeah. And that's why I said if you just have 50, for example, vegans in the example I was giving, you just have that. You're just going to be able, your model is going to do a little worse than duplication. So it's actually worse than your results. However, if you have, like, I always give this other example that's very intuitive. Let's say for whatever reason you're interested in 22 to 24-year-olds. These guys are super correlated to 20 to 21 and to 25 to 26, right? It's obvious, right? And any statistician will tell you, if you have a very small sample for this 22 to 24, you should find some way to kind of combine these three samples in the right way. And this is productized so that you don't need to yourself input what groups are similar. It's learned through correlations. Of course. So yeah, actually quite a bit. A few of the agencies we work with in Europe have consumer health arms, but typically it's not going to be, actually it's never used for clinical studies style studies. So it's more like for, concept testing or, yeah, B2B. So they've done a lot of B2, we've actually done a lot of B2B studies on doctors. For example, we've done one with Sanofi, where they are looking at actually different types of eye doctors. And so on a sample of 300 doctors, for example, you had like 30 ophthalmologists and 30, I'm not an expert there, so and they were boosting basically different types of eye experts. So yes, but it's never actually right now, for now, used for development of any kind of drugs. Yes, that's for sure. So I think an important thing is these algorithms do not need any context because they're just using the correlations in the study. So it's really a statistical model. There is no LLM in the loop. So you can give us any type of survey data from any type of industry, any type of structure, and basically the performance is going to be on the same sort of boundaries, because it's really about boosting the signal and it's not about context. Like the model doesn't need to understand cardiology to be able to boost a cardiology study. So yes, it can be applied there. Yes, for sure. Yeah. So the model is trained from scratch on each survey, right? So basically, I don't know, for example, Andy, maybe you can tell your experience of using the platform and how it works in practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, we think of it this way: every time we're collecting new data, we are boosting that new data. You can probably explain better than me as to whether you're using a new algorithm or not. But at the end of the day, we're with every field, we're boosting that field.
Yeah, from scratch every time. So there is no refresh. It's like if you have collected some data and 3 days later you're like, okay, I'm gonna go back to the field and get more. So here I have collected data and I'm put it into a platform and I'm like, okay, I'd like more data for that group, and so a model is gonna be retrained from scratch and boost that study.
But once those records are created, it's persistent, right? Just like deterministic data.
So that's a bit some of the stuff you're try to do, right?
Well, you might be better prepared to answer this question than I, but I would think that as long as the first-party data has some of the same properties as the survey data, in other words, the group that you want to boost is part of a larger population that you're going to leverage the interrelationships with to boost, I would think yes.
Yeah, so exactly. Basically, that's something we're currently exploring, right? And it's especially useful when you didn't collect data on a specific group of people, for example. So we think of it as a imputation use case, basically. So yeah, it's like as long as basically the groups you're going to impute are correlated to some groups in the study, that's something that is theoretically feasible. It's part of our focus for Q4, and we are supposed to release something in that area like around the end of Q4. But basically, all of what we're doing is a game of always like correlations. If there is some signal and correlation, then you can typically do something. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
What kind of statistics were you looking for to feel comfortable to take this to your stakeholders?
So obviously everyone loves a p-value because that's what they're taught in school. But it was more, honestly, the more persuasive evidence was the picture, the like rounding out that we're using the nearest neighbor to really draw these conclusions from. And so it was less about the actual criterion and more about using real words to explain what we had done and the ways we checked it that resonated with our marketers versus our data people.
And from, just a follow, from the data person perspective, you were also comfortable with that kind of methodological understanding it rather than having hard stats to...
Yeah, I will say we thought and looked into this last year and I just never got comfortable, and this industry has changed so much, this model has changed so much that now I'm fully on board and I'm like, you can't talk me out of synthetic sample, don't try to.
Modeled.
Sorry, augmented data. So I'm a converted believer in this data after spending a year really digging into how it's created. And that's really thanks to these two answering every last question I threw at them for the last 9 months. I won't, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you.